Go ahead and start, Rebecca.
Okay, good morning or good afternoon, everybody, from out here on the West Coast. My name is Rebecca Bratter, and I am the Food Assistance Consultant to USA Rice. I want to welcome everybody and thank you so much for joining us today. Today's topic is fortified rice in the era of COVID-19. I'll get a little bit more into some of the specific details, but I want to start with a few housekeeping notes before we kick this off. We are going to be recording this presentation. So this will be recorded and then shared with all of the attendees. We'll follow up with an email and we'll let you know. Also, I want to let you know that the format for this is going to be a series of panels. We'll hear from different folks that are involved in this program, in the Fortified Rice Program from the US government and from the World Food Program as well. And then what we're going to do after each session, we'll open it up to Q&A. And what you'll be able to do is put your questions into the chat at the bottom of your screen, and we will moderate those for you. If you don't get your questions in during the panel discussion, when we get to the end of the presentation, we're going to open it up again just for general Q&A. So that's just a little bit about how this is going to go. So let me tell you a little bit about why we're here today. Many of you are familiar with the Fortified Rice Program, the evolution of the product. And this is an opportunity for us to sort of touch base and talk about where we are. Obviously, the world is a little bit different today than it was when these programs first started. This program started more than 6 years ago with the micronutrient fortification pilot program. And about 4 years ago, 3 to 4 years ago, fortified rice was added to USDA's master commodity list, and many of you who work with implementing agencies began using this product in your programs. We did a few of these workshops about 3, 4 years ago, and at that time, we were really more focused on the novelty of this product and the implications for addressing global hunger and addressing malnutrition. Of course, this is a micronutrient fortified product, and that brings with it a lot of power and gives us a new tool in the arsenal to address global malnutrition. Jump forward about 4 years, and here we are in 2020, and the world looks a little bit different. In general, I think we're used to multiple simultaneous global crises, unfortunately. At any given time, those of us who work in food assistance are used to addressing global conflicts, whether they be man-made or natural around the world. It wasn't too long ago that we were talking about the 4 famines. But now we're looking at, on top of all of the things that occur around the world in terms of conflict and climate change, now on top of that, we're dealing with the impact of COVID-19. And so that's changed the game a little bit. What does that mean? What are the needs that we need to be able to address in terms of the new demands on food assistance, and what can we do in response? And so we're excited to talk to you today with an excellent panel of folks and talk to you about where we are with fortified rice, how COVID-19 has changed things, how we're all responding, and what we're looking for in the future in terms of quality improvements. We'll touch a little bit on packaging and shelf life studies that are going on right now. So we have a lot of really interesting things to talk about. As you can imagine, we had planned to do this in DC with everybody and get to see your faces in person. We were going to have a little bit of a social event with some rice tastings, but we weren't able to do that. And so I'm really glad you could all join us virtually. We'll when we get to the end of this, we'll take a look at the actual rice product. I have some samples that I want to show you, and we've cooked up a batch of regular rice and fortified rice. And so we'll look at that as well, but that's when we get to the end. So I am going to introduce the panelists, but I believe I want to hand it over first to Betsy Ward, who's the president and CEO of USA Rice, to make some opening remarks, and then I'll come back and I will introduce our first panelists. Betsy?
Thank you, Rebecca. I hope you all can see me. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for a discussion of fortified rice, as Rebecca said, its benefits, impact, and ability to fight global food insecurity and malnutrition. So I'm Betsy Ward. I'm here in just outside of Washington, D.C. I work for USA Rice, and we're the National Trade Association for the U.S. rice industry. And we have every segment under our umbrella. We have farmers, millers, merchants, exporters, and end users of rice. And as Rebecca said, after decades of progress in decreasing the number of people suffering from hunger and malnutrition around the world, the past few years have seen those figures start to rise. So we think the use and benefits of fortified rice can help slow and potentially reverse this troubling trend. American farmers have a longstanding commitment to preserve and protect natural resources and a great story to tell about increasing their rice yields and biodiversity while also reducing water, greenhouse gas emissions, and energy use, all without using GMOs. So we don't use any GMOs in rice in the United States. We also have a long history of giving, whether it's to local food banks or to international disaster responses or local disaster responses. We're very happy that in 2015, after many years of development and research, fortified rice was approved for use in international food assistance programs. Fortified rice provides not only the caloric intake, but can also combat malnutrition through the addition of nutrients, which can be tailored to the needs of each region and population. Rice is also a staple food for billions of people around the world, so it provides a familiar source of food to those suffering from food insecurity. And it's simple, cost-effective way to improve lives of vulnerable populations. So the use of fortified rice across USDA and USAID assistance programs has increased steadily over the past several years. And in FY20, we saw the largest implementation of fortified rice yet, both in terms of volume and the number of countries reached. This achievement has really been made possible by the hard work from many of you here today, and we really thank you for that. We're also very grateful for the productive relationship and open channels of communication between USA Rice, our membership, the US government, and PVOs. So with that, I want to thank you again for participating today, and I really look forward to a productive and informative discussion. I'll turn it back over to Rebecca. Thanks again.
Thank you, Betsy. And I want to echo what Betsy said about thanking you for all of your hard work, and we really appreciate the partnership that we've had with all of you and with USDA and USAID as well, and all of the work by the World Food Program. So with that, I'm very excited to introduce you to our first two panelists. First, we're going to hear from Nick Kharabadze. He is the Director of International Food Assistance at USDA's Foreign Ag Service, their Food Assistance Division. And he's going to show us some of the statistics and talk about the trends and where the product is going. And then we're going to hear from Paul Alberghine. Paul has worked on the Fortified Rice program really since its inception and has been instrumental. Paul is a senior program specialist with the McGovern-Dole program, and I think he's familiar to many of you. And so he'll also talk to us about the trends as well as some of the technological advances and some of the tangent studies that are going on right now. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Nick.
Thank you, Rebecca. 1 second here. Hi there. Let me go presentation mode. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Rebecca, for that introduction. I'm calling in from a very rainy Washington, D.C. As Rebecca mentioned, alongside my colleague, Paul Alberghine, we're representing FAS's International Food Assistance Division. For our presentation today, we'll provide commodity-specific updates relating to the two main international food assistance programs here at FAS. That is the Food for Progress program and the McGovern-Dole Food for Education program. Relating to fortified rice, that is specifically program with McGovern-Dole, and I'll give floor to Paul to jump into those topics. But from our side, I'll provide a quick overview of some of the trends that we have seen under the Food for Progress program. But before we dive too deep into the data and the trends relating to rice, I wanted to highlight FAS's current organizational structure here and exactly where the Food Assistance Division is located. Currently, we are under the Office of Global Programs that is led by Mark Slupek. And if you look to the right of the org chart there, you'll see our division with our Senior Director, Shane Danielson, and the 3 program branches that we have under our division. Those include the 2 programmatic branches for Food for Progress and McGovern-Dole, Food for Education. Ingrid Argesandiro is the Director of Food for Progress, and Lindsay Carter is the Director of the McGovern-Dole branch. And myself, Director of Operations there, where we oversee the transportation and logistics of the in-kind commodities that are utilized under both programs. So with that, let's move ahead to the Food for Progress program. This is primarily a monetization economic development program. It's currently present in over 29 or over 25 countries, in about 29 countries. The commodities programmed under each project are sold in the countries of implementation or regionally by the implementing partners. For the projects to generate the required proceeds in the most efficient manner, commodities monetized under the Food for Progress program are mainly bulk grain and bulk oil commodities. Looking across the Food for Progress portfolio, it spans globally here from from all throughout Asia, Africa, and Latin America to South America there. But to zero in on U.S. rice, we see most of the rice monetizations taking place in West Africa, and we'll discuss that here in a little more detail. So since 2018 and over the past 3 fiscal years, Food for Progress has relied mainly on bulk rice, wheat, and soybean derived commodities to, again, generate cash resources. The commodity tonnages utilized does fluctuate year to year, but these 6 products are consistently used for monetization purposes. Drilling a bit deeper here with the bulk milled rice shipments under the Food for Progress program, you can see from this slide that Burkina Faso and Guinea are the primary recipients, have been the primary recipients of U.S. rice monetization sales, with a little bit, about 6,000 metric tons being monetized in Ghana in early 2017. Below that, we see the purchase price of these commodities. And just to clarify, this is the price that USDA, alongside its implementing partners, pay to source the commodities here in the United States. One item I'd like to note here is you can see the fluctuating nature of the costs here, and that's something that we try very much to project into the future, but that's a very hard task for us here, and working in a very bureaucratic environment, we need to have estimates. We need to establish estimates ahead of time before putting everything into agreements. So the fluctuating nature of the commodity costs really provides a challenge for us. But alongside our implementing partners, their agents, our colleagues over at the Global Market Analysis at USDA, they help us navigate these fluctuations in order to meet project expectations as they were originally designed. So next slide here. So I'd like to give a quick summary of the 2020 awards that the Food for Progress branch made official at the end of last fiscal year. Out of the 5 programs here, we see some of the larger data points that I wanted to share with you guys, specifically looking at the West Africa Regional Program with Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Nigeria that will be implemented by TechnoServe. That is mainly focused on the cashew nut value chain, but the commodities that will be monetized to generate these proceeds include milled rice, about 40,000 metric tons, and soybean meal, about 20,000 metric tons. So for my last slide here, I wanted to give a shout out to FAS's global market analyst, Jenny Morgan and Adolfo Escato. The IFAD division, the International Food Aid division here, works very closely with the global market analysis division to ensure that all proposed monetization sales avoid impact on established trading patterns, right? So with USDA's WASDE report being published earlier this week, both Jenny and Adolfo provided us a very up-to-date picture of global rice trends, and specifically with overall trade and consumption. And these two data points are something that we look at very closely before all the monetization sales are approved. So from this slide, as of November 2020 projections here, we can see that the global rice trade is inching towards 45 million metric tons, while consumption is hovering just below 500 metric tons. Okay, so with that, I'll take questions following Paul's presentation. Paul, screen space is all yours.
Great. Can everybody see me?
Well, give me 1 second here. Disappear myself. Oh no.
Hi, everybody. My name is Paul Alberghine, and I am a Senior International Program Specialist at McGovern-Dole. I've been there about 11 years. And when I started in the McGovern-Dole branch, I was the manager of the micronutrient fortified food aid pilot product, which is some of what I'm going to talk about next. I just want to just start my presentation here with an overview, like Nick did, of where we are active in McGovern-Dole. As you see, we're active in 30 countries with 46 different projects. We have some projects in the Americas, a cluster in West, East, Southern, and Central Africa, and as well, we have some countries peppered throughout Asia. That gives you a pretty good understanding of where we are internationally. Next. Fortified milled rice, the topic of today in McGovern-Dole. The product itself was developed through the micronutrient fortified food aid pilot project. Congress gave us $10 million in the 2010 Farm Bill, and we carried out 6 field-based trials to develop new micronutrient fortified products. One of the projects we worked with was on fortified milled rice. It was an FY12 award, a $3 million award. It was with PATH, the Seattle-based organization, the World Food Program Cambodia, Kansas State University, and Abbott Labs also helped. It was a 6-month study looking at 4,000 kids. It was an efficacy trial with different variations of an ultra rice product, and we were assessing the iron and the vitamin A. After a 3-year process, as Rebecca mentioned, we added the product to the commodity list in 2016. It was first used in 2017. And then later that year in 2017, we also, working with USAID, carried out a follow-on trial in Cambodia where we added coated kernels. There is a US-based technology where they add wax and the micronutrients to the outside of the kernel. That was added along with the extruded kernels, which is what we used in the original MFAP trial. Now, this slide here, it kind of tells you the whole story. This is 2018 through present. As you can see, rice has become the most commonly called forward commodity for direct feeding. So the difference, obviously, Food for Progress, they're monetizing it. This is for direct feeding. So these rice kernels that were grown in Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas, they're shipped overseas and they end up in a bag like that right on the right. I took that photo in Liberia. I think it was in 2017, and it was the first time I had seen fortified rice in the field, and I was quite excited. So I took that photo. As you can see, we had a very good year going into 2021 with almost 80,000 metric tons. Behind that would be pulses. So rice is really increasing, and I think a lot of that has to do with fortified milled rice. Next. This next slide is just commodity utilization from 18 through present. So as you see, For direct feeding, over 51% of what we've done the past few years has been either milled rice or fortified rice, with pulses second, and then veg oil and other products. So just to give you the scale of what we're looking at and how important rice is for direct feeding in McGovern-Dole in many of the countries we work in and around the world. Next. So this slide kind of tells a pretty good story. Of the 9 awards that we made in FY20. So many of my colleagues and I just went through a process, a 3 or 4 month process where we reviewed all the FY20 McGovern-Dole projects. These are the 9 awards that we funded. And under commodities, this is what we call the commodity basket or the ration basket. This is what these organizations are calling forward from USDA. And you'll see one commonality throughout all 9. There's a word in there that starts with an R, that's rice. 8 of the 9 are calling forward fortified rice, and 1 is calling forward milled rice. In my opinion, I think that rice is working a lot for McGovern-Dole because it fits in with a lot of the graduation paths that many of these countries are doing. You know, many times it's a rice and a pulse and a veg oil. WFP seems to use that a lot in their homegrown school feeding approach to graduating these projects, where they're starting to have less rice shipped and to grow more local rice or millet or sorghum or whatever works for them locally. You know, when I first started in McGovern-Dole in 2010, we used to see a lot of CSB 13, or now it's CSB plus. That product itself was formulated for children under 5. This product, the fortified milled rice, was specifically tailored for McGovern-Dole populations. So it's sort of a great product for us because it really feeds into children's cognitive development. And the micronutrients that were selected for that purpose. So we quite like it, and we like its cost effectiveness. And we like that it's being used throughout. So at the bottom, you'll see of the 48,000 metric tons we've called forward this year, over 18,000 are fortified milled rice and 4,000 milled rice. That's a great story. Next, Nick. So again, trends and updates. This is an interesting slide in that it kind of tells that story. FY17, our first year, we had 17,000 milled rice. And only 9,000 fortified rice. And every year you can see that it's sort of become the opposite now, where in 2020, the only country that did not call forward fortified rice was Honduras, because they have a preference for milled rice and they want to use local rice, but all of the others did. And we do see this trend continuing. Again, we don't know if we have a McGovern-Dole budget next year, but if we do, in my experience from reviewing commodity and ration baskets over the past 10 years with colleagues from USAID Nutrition, I feel like rice is here to stay in McGovern-Dole. Next. So, just to talk a little bit about how fortified rice and rice have been helping during this past 8-9 months when we've been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. So in March 2020, as you know, COVID-19 closed many of our schools in McGovern-Dole. So the implementers were forced to adopt different feeding modalities. We were able to get very quickly pre-approval letters for take-home rations, working with many host governments. And through that process, we were able to distribute approximately 23,000 metric tons of commodities as take-home rations to over 2 million households in 26 different projects. And rice, either milled or fortified, makes up a part of that take-home ration in those 19 projects. So everywhere from Timor-Leste to Sierra Leone to Laos, they are getting every month or every 2 months or 3 months, each organization does it differently, they're getting rice. Now, just to give a case story on Liberia, schools closed in March, and Save the Children, working with the Liberian government, they were able to quickly turn and within a month or two get take-home rations. And the photo at the top there, you'll see those black bags, that's fortified rice. And then down below, you can see some of the safety protocols that they have. They're taking temperatures. They're hand washing. Liberia had the benefit of going through 2 Ebola crises in the past 10 years. So they do have a lot of good safety protocols, but we like Save the Children's approach. And the individual 4-month ration there. So it's 1.5 kgs of veg oil, 1.5 kgs of split peas, and then the rice. And then that is essentially shared by the family household. So the food is being spread throughout these communities, given that schools were closed. Next. Again, I just want to talk a little bit about a follow-on trial. At the outset, I talked about the MFAP trial that we did in 2012, and then the second follow-on trial we did with the coated kernels with USAID. Now we're sort of solving one of the last remaining problems around fortified rice, which is the shelf life. Using some McGovern-Dole funding and working with Kansas State University with Dr. Sajid Alave, who helped us on the original PATH fortified rice project back in FY12. He's an extrusion expert. He helped us and is joining this study. It's a 10-month study. It's already ongoing. We'll be getting some results later in FY21. We're working very closely with USAID, their food technologists. And what it does, it supports research and development around shelf life or kinetics, also the impact in source manufacturing on the shelf life, as well as looking for the optimal packaging to maintain nutrient viability. Many of these bags of fortified rice, they get sent to places like Cameroon or the Republic of Congo, where they sit in warehouses. So we need to know after a year, 18 months and onward, if the micronutrients are still viable, if they're still good for the children. Because as you can tell, a person like me, I talk a lot about the micronutrients and the benefit of that. So we want to make sure that they're still viable. And lastly, they're developing a model accelerated shelf life protocol for packaged fortified rice, because we are seeing, in some cases, through local production, some of the implementers are trying to potentially do some fortification in country. So we want to work around that as well. Next. That's it for me. And then we appreciate you taking the time to listen to us, and we're welcome for questions. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Paul and Nick, for that overview. It's really amazing to see the increase in the tonnage of fortified rice going into these programs. And it's also amazing how everybody's been able to pivot so quickly. And I think that's the word that we're all using these days. But it's very encouraging to see those take-home rations and to know that even through this pandemic, we're able to still keep feeding the world and vulnerable populations. So thank you, both of you, for those excellent presentations. We do have a question in from our participants. This one is for Nick. The prices that you showed, Nick, are those FOB in the US or CFR delivered to port of destination?
Those are FOB at the port of loading.
Great. That was pretty simple. We have one more question for both of you. Could you maybe shed a little light on how the focus on nutrition rather than just feeding people has changed the assistance programs, if it has?
Paul, I'll hand that over to you.
Sure. I mean, that's a very complex question. I would say, in the time that I've been in McGovern-Dole, I would say that we've gotten a lot more sophisticated around like the concepts of hidden hunger, and double burden, and we have some new products in McGovern-Dole, like we have a lipid nutrient paste for school-age populations. We have some new fortified products like fortified rice. I just think as a whole, McGovern-Dole is trying to pay more focus on the ration, on the makeup of the ration. Our way of measuring the ration baskets has gotten a lot more sophisticated. We work very closely with dietitians at the USDA Food Nutrition Service that do the nutrition around the domestic school meals. We also work with USAID. Essentially, we're trying to move away from just feeding kids. In the early days of McGovern-Dole, I visited some projects like Chad, where I saw children being fed CSB plus only, long lines of hundreds of kids. The fortified milled rice pulse veg oil, I feel it's more of a dignified ration. Again, it works for graduation. I feel it's more robust, nutritionally sound, but we do still have some projects that use CSB plus. The issue with the way we measure CSB plus is 100 grams of CSB plus, when it's cooked up, it makes 3.5 cups. Now we know a 6-year-old in Malawi is not going to eat 3.5 cups of CSB plus. So in a roundabout way, I can follow up on a longer conversation and put you in touch with the McGovern-Dole director, Lindsay Carter, or our nutrition specialist, Diane DiBernardo, and they can dig deeper. But essentially in McGovern-Dole, we are paying more attention around nutrition, and we are trying to select products that are fortified and balanced, and also work in these countries, and through local production, they'll be able to replace those and enhance those with fresh fruits and vegetables and things like that. So we're definitely focused on nutrition. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, we can definitely see that with the introduction of these new micronutrient fortified products, including rice. I'm going to take one more question from the chat, and then we'll move on to the next panel. And this one is actually for us at USA Rice. So I'll let the USA Rice folks on the line answer it. Does USA Rice plan on helping local farmers in West Africa grow their own fortified rice? And I can chip in too if the USA Rice folks would like me to do that.
I don't believe that's part of the programming for this Food for Progress project that's happening in West Africa. That it's not for growing rice. It's for resale and then monetizing for the benefit of the cashew project there. Rebecca, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, maybe I could just say quickly, you can't actually grow fortified rice in a sense, because the process of making it involves either a rinse-resistant coating on milled rice or an extrusion process where you use a rice flour and it goes through an extrusion machine the same way you would make a pasta, and that same micronutrient fortified additive is then added to the extruded. So it's the same micronutrient aspect, same ratio, but you have to have a process involved. So you can't grow it. I think in general, we like to see, countries have improved agricultural technologies, but this program right now, we're focused more on feeding people and saving lives. Okay, I have a few more questions coming in, but I think
I had one thing to add, Rebecca. In McGovern-Dole, we actually, just in FY20, we did get a project that was talking about doing some in-country rice fortification. But as Rebecca mentions, you need an extrusion machine, you need a dryer, you need so they want to try to create the fortificants in country and mix them with local rice. That is not really done widely. And we're not just sending fortified kernels here from the US to mix with local rice. We've been asked that before. We're not doing that. But in some small cases, there are some projects. The World Food Program is very interested in doing rice fortification in country, but it's still in the very early stages. But it is an area that is being explored by some implementers. Over.
Makes sense. Thanks, Paul. Okay, we had a few more questions come in. What we're going to do is we're going to save those till the end just so we stay on track. And I will come back to the questions that are in the chat. I will make sure we answer those first when we get to the end of this. So now we're going to turn it over to our next two panelists, and we're going to hear from our partners at USAID, the newly organized Bureau of Humanitarian Affairs. I'm excited today that we have two excellent speakers. We're going to hear from Jamie Fisher, who is the team lead on this program, and then we're going to hear from Rufino Perez, who is the senior food technologist. And both Jamie and Rufo were formerly in the Food for Peace programs, which are now called Bureau of Humanitarian Affairs. And like USDA, they've undergone some reorg. So I'm going to let them explain that a little bit better. But first, we're going to hear from Rufino, and he's going to fill us in a little bit on some of the studies that are going on regarding shelf life. So Rufo, the floor is yours.
Rebecca, just to continue the same sequence as Paul and Nick, if you don't mind loading up Jamie's presentation, which is more institutional. Is that okay? I don't hear you well.
Can you guys load up Jamie's presentation and Rufo will use that?
Yeah.
Yes, give me a moment.
Just give us 1 second.
Thanks.
Yep. There you go, Rufo.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jamie Fisher. I'm the acting director of the new Supply Chain Management Division at the USAID Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. And I do want to give an overview of rice and the Title II program, but I think I'd like to start the presentation by just giving just a brief overview of our new reorganization. Next slide, please. So as many of you know, USAID has been undergoing substantial reorganizations. The one most pertinent to this conversation was the merger of the Office of Food for Peace and the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance to create the new USAID Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, BHA. And this slide just gives you an overview of all of the various offices that make up the new Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. We have the BHA front office, which has our new assistant to the administrator, Trey Hicks. Some of you may know him from his time working with the former Senator Corker of Tennessee. And along with Trey Hicks, we have the senior deputy administrator, a man named Max Primorak. We also have 3 deputy assistant administrators that oversee the various offices within the new bureau. One of those individuals, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, it's Matt Nims. He is responsible for oversight of the Office and Field Response Operations, FARO, and also the Office of the Middle East, North Africa, and Eurasia. And I just would like everyone to know that my division, the Supply Chain Management Division, falls within the Office of Field and Response Operations, which again is overseen by Mr. Matt Nims. Also, the Office of Field and Response Operations has an office director and a deputy director. The director of that office is a lady named Stephanie Sabolaine. And the deputy is another individual that you probably remember, Mr. Greg Olson. Next slide, please. This slide just quickly gives you an overview of the Supply Chain Management Division. We're currently comprised of 18 people. The responsibilities of the division have changed. Well, they've grown. I wouldn't say changed significantly, but they have certainly expanded significantly due to the merger. The Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance handles a lot of non-food items and did a lot of disaster operations support, including like aviation support, urban search and rescue team deployment. They were a lot more closely involved with the deployment of the disaster assistance response teams, which are the teams that we deploy to international disasters like the recent explosion in Lebanon, the Ebola response, basically rapid onset crises. And so we're more engaged in those types of events and those teams now. We also do a lot of supply and demand planning for food and NFIs and warehouse management. Our pre-positioning footprint has expanded, it's doubled with the merger. We still have the primary food aid warehouses in Houston, Durban, and Djibouti, but we also have 3 non-food item warehouses now, which we also currently use to put a little bit of food in as well. And those are in Miami, Pisa, and Dubai. Next slide, please. I'd like to go ahead and give you all an overview of the procurement statistics from 2015 to 2020. And you'll notice the chart on the left with the fortified rice doesn't have any statistics for 2015. And that's because the product had just come out and we didn't have any availability at that time, or at least we had not procured it that year. But I think overall, you can see by looking at these statistics that there was a bit of a dip in rice procurement between 2016 and 2017. But overall, rice procurement has been on the rise since then. And in FY 2020, we purchased over 40,000 metric tons. And then if you look over to the chart on the right, you will see that a very significant portion of that, more than 23,000 tons, was fortified rice. And if you look at the overall trends, you'll see a pretty significant increase in the level of fortified rice procurement across the Title II programs. It's increased substantially just between this year and last year. Next slide. This slide is actually a graphical representation of the data that I just presented, but I wanted to show you this as well because it really does give you a good sense of what the procurement trends have been. Next slide, please. I apologize, this slide is a bit busy, but I wanted to give you all a snapshot of all of the countries that we ship rice to. It's quite a number of them. Rice is actually the third most popular commodity among the milled grains and the fortified blended foods. It's number 3 right behind cornmeal and corn soy blend plus. And so the top 5 recipient countries for the Title II program, they're not really represented on this list, but they are Yemen, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Sudan, and Somalia. And so you can see here by looking at this list, the countries that receive the most rice. And in order of most rice received, you have Niger, the Central African Republic, Cameroon, Burkina Faso, and Haiti. And the ones that receive the largest volume of the fortified rice are the Central African Republic and Cameroon. Next slide, please. And this last slide just gives you a quick snapshot of the participating rice vendors. We only have 3 right now. We're always interested in more. This information is also available on the USDA public procurement page. All solicitation information is published right after award of contracts. But again, three vendors. I did want to highlight that there has been periodic demand for parboiled rice, and we oftentimes don't get any bids for parboiled rice, but I wanted to just flag that for everyone because there is still interest there. And if anyone is available to bid on those commodities, we would certainly be interested. And I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Rufo now because I'd like to give him time to discuss the fortified rice shelf life study. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. I think for the benefit of, did you guys hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we hear you.
Thank you. I think for the benefit of a few new people we have in this meeting, some of whom will continue being part of the project, I just want to go quickly through the sequence of events. I know, Paul, you touched some of the phases we went through, but I'll go quickly through kind of the genesis on the technical side and lead into where we find ourselves now. Next slide. We have 2 technologies to produce fortified rice. The first one is coating, the coating technology that the idea is microperforating some of the grains and filling it with a mix of fortified rice, and then in kernels with the payload of micronutrients that we need. And the second one is the extrusion technology, which is just making powder out of rice and then blending it with the premix and producing grains that mimic the shape and color of the actual rice. So those 2 technologies is what we use to blend with the milled rice and ultimately produce what we call fortified rice. The prevalent one here in the US is the coating technology, and the most common in worldwide is the extrusion technology. Next slide. With these 2 technologies, we, like 5 years ago, we had the question among this group, is there any difference between the 2 technologies? And so with this international group that from the USG side, Paul and myself led alongside with Saskia DePere from WFP, we then, I think you need to maybe put the slide a little bit higher to see the lower part of the slide. So we had a few projects that we needed to undertake. One was acceptability. And what that means is basically, trialing the 2 technologies in terms of how people and households would accept them if there was any difference. And that went really well. That project took place in Cambodia and was funded through McGovern-Dole. Then we had this retention project that we carry out with ETH from Switzerland. this university, they help us to determine if there was any difference between the two technologies in terms of retention of the micronutrients when the fortified rice goes through the typical practices in terms of cooking, rinsing, and so on. And so that also yielded that there wasn't much of a difference between the two. I think the last bullet in that slide was a bioavailability study we carry out also with ETH in Switzerland. And that was using radio label isotopes to test in human, actually, if the micronutrients were bioavailable once people consume it. And so that also resulted in information informing us that there wasn't much of a difference between the two technologies. Next slide. And that's how we find ourselves here, because we know that the two technologies work, but some critical work on, let's say, identifying the right packaging, we didn't have much information. Still today, we're using the polywoven bag to package the rice, which is, we all know that is not the most appropriate one. And that's why we are working with the Kansas State University with funding from McGovern-Dole through Nick and Paul to support the undertaking of this research. And basically is looking at the right packaging to protect the integrity of the rice, particularly making sure we preserve the micronutrients. And addressing some other issues like infestation, which is something we face with some other grains, enabling optimum handling, and you will see a little bit more on that, optimizing shipping, warehousing, improve distribution, and contributing to overall cost effectiveness of the product. Next slide. And this is the experimental design for the shelf life study that is taking place at Kansas State. We will be comparing at least two packaging technologies. One that we already have tested in flours, but we will see if it works in fortified rice, the current packaging, and possibly a third one that is the packaging that WFP is currently using. So we'll expose those to 3 different temperatures to accelerate the deterioration of rice and project the appropriate shelf life. Some of the parameters we'll be using includes micronutrients, of course, and then on the microbiology side, yeast and mold, and some more sensorial assessment as well. The analysis will be done using this Q10 model that using any chemical change in the rice exposed to a range of temperature would allow us to extrapolate the actual shelf life of the product. Next slide. The objectives mainly center on identifying the main packaging, and here are some specificity on what type of packaging we are hoping to get to reduce breakage. Is one of those challenges we have throughout the supply chain. So the packaging should be as much puncture and breakage resistant as possible, eliminate pest infestation. And so we're looking at a few things like hermetic, sealable packaging, hermetic from the standpoint of not to like gases, but rather to like insect or bugs that to reduce infestation, maintain existing filling equipment. So we're trying to use packaging as similar as those being used by suppliers today. And we also are looking at sizes. Again, that's something that we are keen about. I think going to to smaller sizes will help in the distribution and the handling of the product, particularly being a little bit sensitive to gender, meaning like some of the women are the most likely to be handling some of this package. So we're taking advantage in this study, looking at possibly having smaller packages. Next slide. In terms of coordination, implementation, and some of the stakeholders involved in the project, funding, as I said, the USDA through Nick and Paul have been very generous to fund this shelf life project with Kansas State. The implementation will be done through Kansas State, Dr. Sajid Alavi, many of you know him. The technical lead, the international coordination, interagency coordination, USAID, USDA, and WFP. I've been leading the technical part of the project for the last few years. Other stakeholders, of course, we're thankful to count with suppliers, packaging technology vendors, premix technology vendors, and so on. Next slide. And that was it, short and sweet. Ready for questions.
Thank you, Rufo, and thank you, Jamie. Short and sweet, but to the point, and some really good information. It's really interesting as we're moving into the next phase of fortified rice usage. It's these studies and this technical work is so critical. It's really important that we keep that integrity of the product, especially as the tonnages go up and it starts to be used more frequently in all of the US government feeding programs. So we're really happy to see that work, and I thank you very much for your report on that. I do have a question. We had some questions on the chat line before. I'm going to go back to those at the end because I think those were more general. So I'm going to start with a question specific to this session. For either of you, excuse me, how is the total fortified rice supplied in bulk, and how much is supplied in bulk and how much is bagged, and which is the preferred bag size?
I can probably answer that one for Title II. All of the rice that we ship for Title II, no matter what type of rice, is always bagged. And that bag size is 50 kg bags, and those are shipped in containers.
Great.
I can jump in for FAS here. For our side, majority of McGovern-Dole commodities are packaged and containerized. As far as Food for Progress, that is a mainly U.S. milled rice that is sold to commercial actors. So that with the size of the lots are usually shipped in bulk. Over.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the questions on the chat line, and just kind of related to that. We have a question. Over the last 5 to 7 years, we have seen more food aid cargo moving in containers. Is this trend mandated in any of the programs? And can you comment on why this is happening?
I can address that for the Title II program as well. I guess if you look at the trends over the last 10 years or so, we've been shipping significantly more high value commodities to treat things like moderate and severe acute malnutrition. We're shipping things like ready to use therapeutic foods, ready to use supplementary foods, HEBs, corn, soy, blend, super cereal plus. Those types of commodities, again, that are very high value, sometimes smaller package sizes. And so they're shipped in cartons, and then those cartons are stretch wrapped and palletized to minimize losses overall. They help to stabilize them in the containers. And then again, the containerization in general helps to minimize losses of the high value commodities. We've been shipping vegetable oil as well, palletized, stretch wrapped, palletized, and containerized, just again to minimize losses. We've seen some pretty significant data to indicate that this has been having an impact on the losses. We're not seeing as much denting and leaking of the cans. And that's really important to us for our bottom line. We don't want the reputational damage of having a dirty, leaking, messy food aid shipment arrive at destination, and from a taxpayer perspective too, we're saving money on losses. So those are the main reasons.
Great, thank you very much. Again, we'll come back to the other question on our chat line towards the end of the presentation. Thank you both for that excellent presentation and for all the work that you do. And we look forward to our continued collaboration. We're going to move on to our last speaker now. So I'd like to introduce Chase Sova. He is the World Food Program Senior Director of Public Policy and Research. And we're very interested to hear from WFP because they are using quite a large quantity of fortified rice in their McGovern-Dole programs. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chase.
Great. Thank you very much, Rebecca. I really appreciate it. Thanks to all the other speakers as well for sort of setting the scene here. Everyone's hearing me okay, I'm assuming. Rebecca, you can give me the thumbs up.
We hear you fine.
Beautiful. So my name is Chase Sova. I'm the Senior Director of Public Policy and Research at the World Food Program USA. WPUSA is a nonprofit organization that supports the mission of the United Nations World Food Program here in the American market. We do that in a couple different ways. I spend a lot of time working with private sector actors who are providing in-kind contribution or cash contributions to the World Food Program, whether that's corporations or individuals, and then in my portfolio specifically, spent a lot of time up on Capitol Hill, educating lawmakers and making sure folks understand what's at stake internationally when it comes to the problem of global hunger and the way that the World Food Program is helping to address that. So, I've got a couple minutes here with you guys. I want to try to ground some of the conversation that we've just had in WFP operations on the ground. And I also want to provide a little bit, I think, even broader context here as to what we're seeing in the world in terms of fortified rice usage. But bottom line, and I think, Rebecca, you did a great job in outlining this at the start of the conversation, is that we have an unprecedented hunger problem today. We have at least 700 million people who are chronically undernourished. They're not getting enough to eat day in and day out. At the same time, we're seeing about 135 million people who are at crisis levels of hunger. And these are the folks that WFP is spending a lot of time thinking about. These are groups of people who aren't really sure where their next meal is going to come from, and they are in need of emergency assistance. Rebecca, at the outset of this conversation, you mentioned the four looming famines. Well, that was 2017. Now here we are again in 2020, looking at a similar crisis, a series of looming famines in Burkina Faso, Northeast Nigeria, Yemen, and South Sudan. So, hunger trends are very decisively moving in the wrong direction around the planet. And it's happening because of this toxic brew of conflict, climate, and COVID-19. Add to this the nearly 2 billion people around the planet who are suffering from hidden hunger, and you really see that population balloon even further. These are folks who are suffering from some pretty severe micronutrient deficiencies. And it's also the reason folks like Jamie and others are increasingly buying these high value products like RUTF and RUSF to try to bring children in particular back from the brink of very severe hunger. But specific to COVID-19, since I know that's vaguely our focus today, I think by the end of the year here, the World Food Program is suggesting that we may see that acute hunger number nearly double to 270 million people. This is largely due to economic impacts of COVID-19, right? We're seeing job losses in the informal economy. We're seeing massive reduction in remittances. Countries that are relying on commodity exports are seeing pretty significant falls and deficits in their foreign reserves, affecting their ability to import food. So the COVID-19 crisis has been pretty severe, and it's just another layer on conflict and climate change that we're already causing so many trouble and causing numbers to head in the wrong direction. In Latin America, I've got new numbers out just this morning from the World Food Program. We've seen a quadrupling of hunger in the countries where WFP is operating in across Latin America. That region is on pace to see recession, the worst recession it's had in over a century. So things aren't looking good in that part of the world. And the bottom line is this, there has never been, I think, a more important time to be providing nutritious calories to people around the planet. So first off, I can't enter a conversation like this without thanking colleagues at USAID and USDA for the life-saving support we receive each year from the American government at the World Food Program. As I always say, as someone who represents the World Food Program here in the United States, through the nonprofit. I mean, WFP is as American as apple pie, right? This is a program that was thought up by Eisenhower. It was shepherded into law by President Kennedy and Senator George McGovern. And really, it's been led without interruption since the early 1990s by an American. So this is a program, as I talk about WFP and what we're doing on the ground, that everyone on this call can be immensely proud of and even share in that Nobel Peace Prize award that the organization received just recently. So let me talk really briefly about WFP's interest in the fortification space more broadly, and I'll narrow down here into the rice fortification specifically. But WFP in general is dedicated to scaling up fortified foods in its distribution baskets. And a bigger part of our overarching goal, of course, is to help people to access more diversified, nutritious diets in general. And fortification, of course, has a big role to play in that. WFP is a massive organization, and just back in 2019, we were able to purchase about 400,000 metric tons of fortified foods of all types through our own procurement channels. And we saw in 19 and 20 pretty significant growth in fortified rice in that portfolio. So in 2004, we started using things like fortified wheat flour and maize flour and oil and, of course, iodized salt. But rice was largely missing out from that basket, and I think is an incredible opportunity. Now, globally, only about 1% of rice is fortified. And in WFP's pipeline today, it's closer to 3%. So we're heading, I think, in the right direction, and we're sort of beating what's available out in the market. And I think that's evidence of WFP's commitment to seeing fortified rice in its supply chains. So COVID-19 has certainly challenged our ability to continue to scale up and grow year in and year out on fortified products. It's made it harder to buy and move foods of all kinds, so that isn't necessarily a surprise. But there remains a commitment to WFP headquarters in region and country offices and in the nutrition team specifically. You look at our nutrition team at WFP, we've got a fortified review committee at WFP. So when folks in country and regional offices are thinking about procurement plans, they're talking to our fortified review committee to build awareness for the importance of fortified products in our pipelines. So I think rice is certainly the next frontier in the way that we're thinking about fortified foods. This is a product, of course, that is such a critical delivery vehicle for micronutrients around the world. And that's why the fortified rice is just so critical, right? We've got 3 billion people who are relying on rice as a core staple food in their diet. In many places where we're working, in Bangladesh and Cambodia and other places, rice is contributing to as much as 70% of daily energy intake. Milled rice, of course, is a great source of energy, but not of micronutrients. And fortified rice is this really elegant solution. It's something that doesn't require people to change their eating habits. And I think, like for so many people on this call, in a lot of places where WFP is working and the beneficiaries we're trying to serve, rice is an incredibly sacred thing, right? It's got to look and taste indistinguishable from the non-fortified version. And that's really what we're able to get with American-grown product that's distributed through USDA and USAID. So let me say this. I mean, US government, US grown fortified rice, I think is already making a pretty big dent since it's coming online in 2015 in malnourishment around the world, right? We've the World Food Program in any given year is seeing rice in its programming and US government contributions in about 36 countries through the Title II and McGovern-Dole programs, but fortified rice, especially through McGovern-Dole, where we're delivering that product in places like Cambodia, Ethiopia, Republic of Congo, and Haiti, and a couple new awards coming online in the coming year. These programs are incredibly important, right? The World Food Program is the largest non-governmental provider of school meals on the planet, right? And these programs can be transformative in a child's life. The McGovern-Dole program can be transformative for a child, right? Very often, what a child is receiving in a school meal program is the only meal that they're going to get that day. We find that it increases enrollment, especially among young girls. It's been linked to improved performance in school. We know these things about the school feeding programs around the world and about McGovern-Dole specifically, but I think it's worth reiterating here. And we know that we can use these supply chains to scale up assistance through take-home rations. And I think Paul mentioned this too in his comments, but we're seeing this happen in a lot of different places. The McGovern-Dole programs, of course, have turned into these elegant solutions for take-home rations. A place like Peru, where the World Food Program has been doing advocacy and education programs around fortified rice for some time now. In 2019, we were successful in getting fortified rice in those school meals programs. They reached about 2.5 million kids. During COVID-19, that's turned into a take-home fortified rice ration for a lot of kids and their families. So really, I think, again, to Rebecca's point, pivoting here with school meals and fortified rice is a big part of that. But I think it's worth reiterating here, right? Like, one of our big donors, when a donor like the US government is rolling out a product like fortified rice through the support of American farmers, and organizations like USA Rice, I mean, it really does open up doors for us, right? It encourages others to do the same. It gets national governments involved and on board. And the U.S. in-kind contribution in the short and medium term is going to be really incredibly important, right? Procurement of fortified rice in many places is super challenging, right? We already talked about it being just 1% of global production. Right now, there are pretty long lead times for production. There are delivery challenges and limited supply, right? Fortified rice needs to be produced in sufficient volumes for it to be viable and for us to sign contracts for. So, different national standards exist for fortification as well, different modes of production. WFP, frankly, is working in conflict-affected and super fragile environments, right? So fortified rice production is only happening in places where there's more centralized milling operations, where it can be successfully blended. In a lot of places where we're working on ground, rice milling is happening frankly, at the household level. So right now we've got, if you look across rice fortification, at least a couple of years ago, it's only mandatory in about 6 countries. By way of comparison, you look at 85 countries to 100 countries that have mandatory wheat flour fortification legislation on the books. So a lot of growth potential here with rice. And I think all this to say, it's just an incredible time for rice fortification, and the resources that are being provided by American producers are just so critical right now. One other comment, before I kind of leave this open to questions, is that, with COVID-19 in particular, I think we're learning more and more about the vulnerabilities of improper nutrition and undernourishment and malnourishment. We know from previous epidemics and outbreaks that children who are severely malnourished are about 9 times as likely to die from infection than healthy children. There are some questions already being raised about vaccine efficacy among malnourished populations. Again, there's never been at a more important time right now, I think, than to be delivering fortified products like these and delivering proper nutrition to folks. I probably got more to say, but Rebecca, I am conscious of time and I want to make sure we have enough time for questions here for the group. So I'll leave it there.
Great. Thank you so much, Chase. That was really an excellent report and encouraging. And I probably should have started by congratulating you and the World Food Program on that Nobel Peace Prize, which is a big deal for you guys and for all of us here in the food assistance community. So belated congratulations on that. And I really appreciate how you talked about the intricacies of the partnerships here and all the different people working together, and how this program is really, the US government programs are really opening doors. So I appreciate those comments and all of the work that WFP has done and continues to do regarding fortified rice. So let me just quickly open it up. Are there any questions for Chase? We still have some questions on the line that I'm going to come back to at the end. And so if there are no questions for Chase, I'm actually going, just in the respecting the time limitations, and since we're going over the hour here, one of the things I did want to do, and as I mentioned in the beginning, we were really hoping this was going to be a live in-person event so that we could cook the rice and sample it and compare it, but we can't do that. And obviously it's hard to do virtually because you can't taste it. But I did want to, at least, just because even me included, we haven't necessarily had a chance to see the product and to see what it looks like. And so you're going to have to go on a little bit of faith here that I am telling you the truth, and I swear that I am. But what we have here, this is actually the fortified rice product right here that I'm pointing to. And this is regular long grain milled rice right here. So right off the bat, you don't see any difference in the product, which is something I think is important. That was something that was in the very beginning of this process was discussed. And I don't think that's an issue. This is over here, the regular milled rice. I'm sorry, this over here is the fortified rice. And so this product that you're looking at is actually the rinse resistant coated version. And I wanted to show you the packet. This is just a sample. If any of you are interested in getting one of these samples, we can actually send them to you. But you can see here, this is for our feeding programs, and it lists here all of the micronutrients that this is fortified with: the vitamin A, all the B vitamins, folic acid, and zinc. And so this is the incredible fortified rice product that we've been talking about in this whole session. And this is the grain, this is the white rice, and just to prove that it's white rice, I will show you the package which says white rice. And then, of course, I think it's important to show you what it looks like cooked up. So I've been very careful to keep these two separate. This is the fortified rice cooked, and this is the long grain milled rice cooked. So take a look, and you don't see any difference. And I've tasted them, and I'll tell you that they taste exactly the same. So, you know, again, I hoped we could do this in person. Since we couldn't, that was the next best thing. And I just wanted everybody to get a sense of what we're talking about and how much work has gone into this product and how well made this is. And of course, as you know, there are two kinds. There's rinse resistant coated and extruded. And what I'm showing you today is the rinse resistant version. So with that, I'm going to wrap up.
Rebecca, I just want to answer really quickly a question that is in the chat box.
I was going to ask you that, but go ahead.
Yeah, so it was related to citrate, tricalcium citrate, if somebody was asking if we are using that. And it's important to say yes, and actually to give the credit to DSM, they developed that technology. We were having some issues with rice, chelating of rice, which made it not bioavailable. And that technology has eased that concern we had. And so I just wanted to say, yes, we're using that technology, and wanted to give the credit to DSM for that. Over.
Great, thank you, Rufo. Since you're on the line here, we have another question, and I'm going to ask you, and if somebody else wants to weigh in from the group, please do. Is the fortified rice primarily long grain varieties, or are short and medium grain varieties also fortified?
We could potentially fortify any rice because of the nature of the two technologies. But I think it depends on the program, which type of rice we are procuring. But technology-wise, we could apply to any rice.
Great. I have another question. Jamie, maybe you can answer this one. Is there a list or a spec sheet of the fortification required by USAID?
We do have that, and I can share that with everyone after the meeting.
Great. We will send that out to everybody on the call. All right. I have another question here.
This is Paul. I can weigh in. From McGovern-Dole, traditionally we do offer medium grain, long grain. I traditionally see long grain mostly, but it's really up to the implementer if there's a preference. I think I mostly see long grain though. Thank you. Over.
Thanks, Paul. Okay. Another question, I think maybe this is for Rufo and for Paul. Is the new type of package being designed in the form of the current woven bags?
The current woven bags, they will be part of the experiment. And so we have some challenges with that bag, which is that we cannot tailor the One, the breathability of it, meaning how much oxygen and humidity goes in and out, and we cannot heat seal it. I think there is an upgraded version of that packaging that will be used in the shelf life study, and we will see how it goes. But as it is right now, it's not the most ideal packaging.
All right, thank you. We have one last question on the chat. I'm just gonna sum it up, but the question is asking about whether, this is for USA Rice, whether USA Rice is supportive of using extruded or coated rice as a method to fortify rice in the US instead of dusting. So I'll just quickly say we do use extruded or rinse resistant coated rice. We don't use the dusting technology. So just quickly on that. And if anybody else on the line wants to weigh in on that, please do. Otherwise, that is the last question on our chat. And I want to really give a huge thanks to all of our panelists today. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thanks to all the participants. As we've kind of said in this conversation, this is a partnership, and we're all working together to stamp out hunger and to provide some relief to food insecure countries around the world, and to really focus on malnutrition as well as hunger through these micronutrient fortified products like rice. And we're very proud of this work. Thank you to all the folks who called in today, and to the implementing agencies for all the work you do. And congratulations again to WFP on your Nobel Prize. That's the end of our webinar, but I want to hand it over to Jessica Kincaid, who's the Manager of Trade Policy at USA Rice, and open the floor for her to give some closing comments. Jessica?
Thank you, Rebecca. We at USA Rice are very proud to have fortified rice as a tool in the Global Food Assistance Toolbox, and we look forward to strengthening our partnerships with both government and PVO implementers to maximize its use and benefits around the world. I also wanted to thank all of our excellent panelists today. Your presentations were very informative and show the positive and growing impact of fortified rice in combating hunger and malnutrition around the world. Thank you as well to everyone who tuned in and asked questions. We hope that this webinar helped you gain a greater understanding of how fortified rice has been implemented over the past several years, its nutritional benefits, and how it can be programmed going forward to help fight hunger and malnutrition as the COVID-19 pandemic continues. If you have any further questions that you were not able to ask today, or you'd like to be sent a sample of fortified rice, please feel free to email me, and I will either send you the rice or I will forward your question on to our panelists. So thank you once again. And if there is nothing else, I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.